Worker safety. So every employee has the right to a safe work environment. The Occupational Safety and Healthy Act of 1970 established the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or also known as OSHA. OSHA establishes standards for safe working conditions and also helps regulate safety in the workplace. Before OSHA, the federal government actually did not regulate safety in the workplace very often or at all. And so it was largely up to the employer to make working conditions safe. So, employer responsibilities. An employer must provide employees with a workplace that does not have serious hazards. They must follow all applicable OSHA safety and health standards. They must also notify OSHA within 8 hours of a workplace fatality. They must notify OSHA within 24 hours of any work-related injury, so an inpatient hospitalization, amputation, or a loss of an eye, so a serious injury. They also must provide required training to all workers in a language and vocabulary that they can understand. An employer must also find and correct safety and health problems. They must also try to reduce hazards first by making changes to the working environment rather than just saying you can wear a protective mask or a helmet and just relying on protective equipment. They have to try to reduce hazards first by changing the work conditions. And they also must post this OSHA poster on the right side somewhere prominently. So in your workplace, you should be able to see this poster posted somewhere. As a worker, you do have the right to a safe workplace. You also have the right to raise safety and health concerns without being retaliated against. So if you think something is unsafe, you can tell your employer, and that employer cannot take any negative action against you because you reported that. You also have the right to report work-related injury or illness without being retaliated against. So if you're hurt on the job, you can report that without fear of retaliation. You also have the right to file a complaint with OSHA within 30 days if you have been retaliated against. So if you do file a complaint or you raise a concern and your employer takes a negative action against you, you can also report that to OSHA. You also have the right to receive information and training on job hazards. So for example, if you are a fast food worker, you should be trained on how to use all the large equipment. If you're making French fries and hot oil, you should also have information about potential issues arising from that hot oil. So there are a lot of job hazards for everyday workplaces that you might not be aware of, and you have the right to know about them. As a worker, you also have the right to request confidential OSHA inspections if you believe there is an unsafe or unhealthy working condition at your workplace. So just be aware of that. Also, if you request an inspection, you also have the right to participate in that inspection. Workers also have the right to see OSHA citations issued to your employer. So if your employer has a history of OSHA violations, that means the workplace might not be very safe and your employer might not be dedicated to maintaining a safe environment. So you have a right to look at all of those citations if there are any. Workers also have a right to request copies of your medical records and tests that measure hazards in the workplace, and also a workplace injury and illness log. So you have the right to see all of that information. So what happens if there is a dangerous situation at work? You can file a complaint with OSHA. And you can also, if possible, bring up those conditions with your employer. Let them have a chance to fix that condition if you think there is something dangerous. And also, if the condition presents a risk of death or serious harm to you as an employee, then you also have the right to refuse to work. If you believe that OSHA does not have enough time to inspect and that dangerous situation could potentially harm you, you have a right to refuse work. All right. OSHA also has provisions about personal protective equipment or PPE. So employers must pay for PPE if the equipment is necessary for the job. So, for example, if you're a biomedical research assistant and you are dealing with viruses and diseases that are potentially harmful, your employer does need to protect you by providing a hazmat suit, for example. Your employer must also pay for PPE if that PPE is required by OSHA. So, depending on your job, OSHA actually has a pretty strict list of health standards and personal protective equipment that your employer must provide. And your employers must also provide PPE if that PPE protects employees from serious injury or death. Okay, so employers are also required to train each worker on use of that PPE. So they have to train you on when protective equipment is necessary, what kind of protective equipment is necessary, how to properly adjust, wear, and take off that PPE, and also the limitations of that PPE. So protective equipment can only protect you so much. It can't protect you against everything. So they are supposed to also tell you the limitations of that protective equipment. In these cases, also, there is a list of employees do not have to pay for protective equipment if it's non-specialty clothing equipment, or if it's just everyday clothing, they don't have to pay for that. They also don't have to pay for hairnets or gloves worn by food workers if it's used for consumer safety and not employee safety. They don't have to pay for lifting belts. So if you're lifting heavy equipment, they don't have to pay for a lifting belt. They also don't need to pay for items needed for weather protection. So if you're working outdoors, they don't need to provide you with an umbrella or like a raincoat. You have to provide that or pay for that yourself. And also, if an employee loses or intentionally damages protective equipment, an employer does not have to replace that equipment. Okay, so some types of PPE. There's shoes, gloves, vests and coveralls or full body suits, helmets and hard hats, masks, respirators, goggles and face shields, and also ear muffs and earplugs. To learn more, please visit the OSHA site. They do have a very comprehensive website with regulations and safety precautions for every type of work environment. So just visit their site. All right, so what if your employer refuses to pay for PPE? First, you probably need to make the determination whether they should and have to, by law, pay for that equipment. Sometimes employers don't have to pay for PPE, so just make sure that in the situation, if they're required to pay for it, they should. And if they're not, then they actually might be violating state and federal laws regarding workplace safety, workplace expenses, and also minimum wage. So file that complaint with OSHA if you believe your employer should pay for your PPE and they refuse to. So you can file a OSHA complaint. You can also actually file a wage complaint or a wage claim if they're deducting protective equipment out of your wages, or if you're paying for protective equipment that you believe your employer should actually pay for. Some additional resources for you. Go ahead and visit the OSHA site. They have the workplace poster, they have a workers' rights pamphlet, and they have links and resources to help you file a complaint. The Department of Industrial Relations also has information about California labor law, OSHA safety health standards, and also workers' compensation for if you're injured on the job. So these are all resources that you should definitely check out if you start working.